there's been this ongoing change in Silicon Valley. Once upon a time, it was a very libertarian kind of, we need to stay away from government. Some places like Apple never had a DC office because they were worried about getting corrupted and getting into the game and becoming like defense contractors. Now they just want to be defense contractors. Peter Thiel's hilarious in the sense that here he is, this like great libertarian. My client is government, and it's like totally embrace government. It's the weirdest like Orwellian thing. We talk about Orwellian in terms of being backwards.
You would prefer the human race to endure, right? You're hesitating.
Yeah, well,
Yes?
I don't know. I would.
There's a bunch of libertarians who want to use government to control you.
What's left? Back again in the stew. Different studio. We're in fucking Oxford. Would you believe it? Someone complained the other day that we only talk to Oxbridge types.
Oh, really?
So I don't know if we've done a lot to disavow that notion, because today we're interviewing an academic who's a visiting professor at Oxford at the moment, Tim Wu. He is one of the most eminent legal scholars in America. Tim Wu served as Joe Biden's advisor on tech policy and antitrust. And antitrust is basically this idea about breaking up monopolies. So today we're going to be talking about all sorts, including his latest book, The Age of Extraction, which is essentially a critique of how tech platforms have fucked up the entire world and have turned our capitalist society into an extractive, non-value creating entity that's making us all sadder.
It's a fun, easy read, very digestible, and I think it shows how the world has been turned a bit upside down. And it's a bit of a manifesto or a call to action as to how we can actually try and do something about it.
I mean, what's also great about Tim is that he's run for office as well in America, which makes him kind of slightly different to your normal special advisors, although many often have visions of themselves being in office themselves. He ran in New York. He's recently spoken about that man himself, Zoran Mamdani, and the things that the Democrats can learn from his campaign. It'll be interesting to hear why it failed. Why did the Democrats lose their way from somebody who was literally inside the White House and worked for fucking Sleepy Joe?
Yeah, exactly.
Worked for Sleepy Joe.
No, Sleepy Joe. Well, he's running tomorrow.
But when you think about the unpopularity of Keir Starmer right now, he's the least popular prime minister on record
ever had,
right.
which is incredible, really, if you think about what Liz Truss did.
But Liz Truss, I mean, I think the reason she was unpopular because her ideas were unpopular. The reason why Keir's unpopular is because he is unpopular, and I think that's the difference. Is the country doesn't like him.
Right.
As a person.
I
don't think they liked her as a person.
I didn't think they liked her as a person, but they could see an ideological reshaping of the country that they disagreed with, and
right,
so
which
responded in a certain way. Yeah,
and
exactly.
then led to.
Why do people? As an outsider, seems to me. I mean, he seems polite, relatively well spoken. I actually don't fully understand why people don't like him, because he doesn't. I guess he's
just very bland and technocratic, and we live in a time of colourful characters.
He's inoffensive, and I think in offensive times, you have to
have an enemy.
You have to have an enemy, but you have to kind of cement yourself as somebody, because he's such a non-character in political life, in kind of cultural life, in any aspect of what it is to be part of any bourgeois British society. I think he doesn't really do it.
He doesn't seem very inspiring, I guess, as an outsider, but at least,
Exactly.
I mean, he's not offensive. He seemed like a really good high school principal or something to me.
Yeah,
exactly.
But or a great civil servant, or a really fantastic top-level civil servant. And I think that there was a belief philosophically that you could fix our system with a safe pair of hands.
Right.
And that part of what had undone Britain had been hubris, or people overestimating their ability. And that probably wasn't quite true. I mean, there was a lot of, issues of scandals and corruption and so forth. People didn't respect the office like Boris Johnson. But the idea that our situation is just a little tweak here and a little change there, and that's going to fix everything.
And it's a personality trait that will be required to solve these problems.
Which is being sensible. That. And I think you can be the most, wholeheartedly procedural person and really care about the office of the state. But that still doesn't necessarily give you the gumption to actually be able to change these things.
I mean, this reminds me of stuff we thought about in the Biden White House. In the early days, I think the comms people in the Biden White House thought that people didn't want the president in their life. They didn't need him talking about every single damn thing that happened and that like people would come to appreciate that. But I actually don't think it worked.
No.
Like I think that whatever it was, like the times had changed. Because, you know, like whatever happens, President Trump will tweet something about what's
He's
happening.
always talking to you,
He's
whether you wanted to or not.
Yeah, he's in people's heads constantly. And the theory of Biden was, or the Biden's comms team was like, you know, maybe the president should kind of be inobtrusive again, or not like in your daily life, and people will like that. But I guess the problem was that difference is that then he didn't have his own voice, and instead it was like whatever people were saying about him got in people's heads because people still wanted. I don't know. It was not successful.
But Trump's much more able to have a dialogue with the public, and even though he sets the dialogue entirely on his terms, you're having a conversation with him and his practices of government and his ideological direction or whatever it is. With Starmer or people of that ilk, Biden and others, it's not only that they're not having a dialogue, they've got nothing to say. And this is, I think, the problem.
There's no
nothing...
ideology that's coherently telling the story together.
Yeah, exactly.
And we said this, one of our reflections was that, you know, even from the top level of MAGA down to just your average voter in like a deindustrialized community, there is a theory of the state, you know, understanding of who we're for and who we're against, what the mission is, what we're trying to achieve, make America great again. There's a coherence
theory of change. How do you create a programmatic method of politics that suits your ideological ends? This government does not have any of those tools.
But the wider progressive movement doesn't, I don't think, you know, and that's part of the reason why we launched the podcast. We call it What's Left, because what the fuck are we meant to be doing? What the fuck are we meant to be doing right now? Because we're not trying to. I think history has given us a very good record here about what's failed in pursuing and prosecuting socialist politics, and I'm very bored of 20th century arguments.
Right,
we live in 21st century times, and Jovan's always been prosecuting that.
I mean, it is my kind of slogan: is that the Labour Party is a 20th century party which has been led by 20th century men. And that's a historical fact. Yes. All but two leaders were born in the 20th century. And so how do you take a social democratic aspiration combined with a socialist politics, with a fractured working class, disparate cultures emerging in kind of Western civilizations, and cohere that towards a progressive end?
Yes.
The question just becomes longer and longer and longer.
Right. As from my experience as an official in Biden White House, I'll say a few things, I guess, that come to mind if that's a direction we're willing to go. One thing that about this tweeting in your head, I feel that what Trump has is a very acute understanding of attention and its power, and this need to fight attentional wars with the methods of our time. I think, it's kind of obvious. He is an old guy too, but he has, since his entire career, most of it in the entertainment industries or in like New York gossip politics, like specialized in even just grabbing that part of attention so you get heard. And the challenge is that I think a lot of people don't understand is sometimes less about the message, but getting attention in the first place. It doesn't matter. Sometimes you could have the most interesting, or you could be, if someone actually received it, if someone sat down and read like the core of the Biden speeches or whatever, or maybe Keir Starmer, I agree with this. But the thing is, they're not even, they haven't even got the initial attention. It's not there yet. It's not even there. Maybe you guys probably read them, but I'm just saying citizens, they get this other idea of what he stands for.
What just struck me when you said that was this sense of, Ronald Reagan was an actor, right? And that telegenic time meant that someone like him as a communicator could really rise to the fore. But now we're living in the era of the comedian. Yeah. And from Zelensky, Zelensky's background to Trump. Trump is a comedian. Trump spent 30 years essentially honing his craft, his character, and learning that comedy is a great shield,
right?
Not just for, let's say, unfavorable politics of a specific time, but also that old adage that Jordan Peterson says that the court jester can tell the truth.
Right.
The irony is that the truth is one that he's constructed, and it's got fictional enemies. And there is, but there's some bits that he has revealed which are true. That land on genuine, real problems, like the debt problem, for instance, for America. That is real.
Right.
And not just, I think, that being the case, it's also they've been able to successfully curate the theatre that they want. So they've manipulated events such in their favour that they can be the kind of gesture in the court, because that audience has emerged over time through economic conditions, through political circumstances. And in all of that, they've been able to say, as you say, the kind of fictional enemies are X, Y, and Z, and get people into the door. So that means they're part of the spectacle, which they've created. But in a period of which I think we are great men of history, that to a point is the method that you have to employ. And I would like to see that coming to an end, no doubt, of course. But you have to create your audience in order to convey a message, I would say.
Yeah, and I guess I'm, talking about. I wrote another book earlier called The Attention Merchants, and I spent a lot of time studying like human attention and its methods and historic antecedents. And it is this two-stage process. You have to first get attention, then you can deliver. And a lot of people miss stage one, especially like academics, intellectuals, smart politicians. They assume people are listening, before getting. Anyway, it's sort of an obvious point, but it's amazingly often forgotten. So I feel like probably not that many people really have listened to Keir Starmer's speeches that carefully, as opposed to sort of reading about them or something, partially because maybe they're not as interesting. I don't know, whatever it is, he doesn't seem to be succeeding at step one. Yeah. So that's one thing. I agree with you guys also about having this entire kind of constructed world with villains and narratives, and it does work. It's almost like a game show. There has to be like a structure.
There's got to be a winner.
Yeah, there's got to be a winner, a loser, a setup, whatever. And he can. In some ways, it doesn't matter if you lose as long as the game is coherent. Like it can have rounds where you lose or win, but you're right that there needs to be some kind of like game structured.
But that's where Mandami in his recent win, I think, is perfectly at display, because Trump likes him because he's playing the same game.
Are you affirming that you think President Trump is a fascist?
I've spoken about...
That's okay, you can just say yes. Okay.
They're playing on different kind of political turfs, but they're playing exactly the same game. And there's an admirability that then forms because we understand what's at play here. And I think politicians need to move away from this moderated, performative politics, and actually, if they're going to perform properly and perform well and get people on your team and on your side and beat up that enemy.
British version of Mandami.
No. Zach Polanski would like to be, but I don't think he's quite there.
But the British person needs to emerge. They can't be kind of supplanted as what we're seeing with party politics and the machinery involved around that. A natural leader emerges from community and things of that sort, but the establishment way, which I think the country's become quite acquainted with, makes it so much more difficult to have someone of his sort.
What you need is a JD Vance like story, but them to decide to actually be fucking progressive.
Right.
That's what I think would work, because realistically, and I've seen you speak about this elsewhere, talking about Mamdani, and it really struck me as something that the establishment Labour Party in this country wouldn't listen to, which is that economic populism has to feature somewhat in the analysis of being able to fix this. And this is, I think, what your book's really about, actually, is laying the groundwork for saying, without economic populism, we can't reshape what's possible with our current system. And capitalism has got to a place where we don't really recognize it anymore. Right. Because it's anti-competitive, etc. And we'll expand and explain all of these concepts, I think, because for some listeners, this is quite esoteric, and we should get into the thesis of your book. But that thing about economic populism is clearly the way in which you can unite all of these disparate voting blocks who have very different social politics, actually, and are currently getting pushed away and pushed apart from each other precisely because of those facts. You need to find some overarching solution to build that tent again. And it's pretty evident, I think, to us that is the way you do that.
I mean, in the first bit of your book, you mention about the hollowed out middle class. Yeah. And I think that is the essence of what a political left-wing project should be trying to create. A socially mobile middle class that sustains the kind of wealth creation of this country. And the fact that within the heart of capitalist democracies like Britain, parts of Europe, the United States has lost that tradition of, well, actually, capitalism can be subservient, but also can be a forceful good in some ways, has rendered the extractivists to basically take control and do it.
I mean, I could summarize what the book's demand is, or what it wants. It's a wealthy middle class. It's not against wealth. It's not against making money, but it's against extremes and a two-class society and like a return basically to feudalism where, people are working like dogs except for rich people. It is, in that sense, different. I think the socialist project was sort of different in this empowerment of workers, or who knows what, if it's really different. But yes, if you could boil it down to one aspiration, is that there should be business, there should be profit. The market makes a lot of wealth, but we really want it to be balanced, and we want like a lot of people to be rich, not like a tiny number of people.
Tim, can you start by explaining to us the kind of ancient history of the platform and what we mean when we talk about platform economics?
Sure. So every society has a few central places where commerce, speech, everything takes place. I mean, everyone writes books differently. The way I started writing this book is I had a sentence, which is everything has to happen somewhere. That's where I started. I'll start the book with that. Now it's somewhere in chapter 5, but I thought I'd start the book. And I meant by that something more profound than it might sound, which is there needs to be places where commerce and speech and other things happen. And what those spaces are like is going to shape the kind of civilization we live in, whether there's a stronger or weaker middle class, whether there's wealth disparity, whether you even have economic freedom at all. And what I mean by these places, in ancient Greece, there was the Agora, the sort of city square. Rome had its forum. Physical cities had their main streets. What's happened today is many of our platforms, central spaces, have become online and are places, like Amazon or Instagram or Facebook or whatever. And they're different in fundamental ways, I think, than the older, like Main Street or even like the pub or whatever, like the public spaces. Because for one thing, they're profit seeking. For another, they're kind of constantly spying on you and trying to shape and manipulate your behavior in subtle ways. And third, they're sort of ambitious. They want to be powers unto themselves. I mean, it'd be really crazy to say, oh, the town square wants to rule our country or something. It doesn't make any sense, right? Like, what are you talking about? But today, the platforms like want to be in charge. It's kind of a main character syndrome thing going on where, they forget that they're the places where things happen and they want to be everything. So I think that is the problem. And I think that they are just kind of extracting a big tax from the rest of the economy. And that basically is what the book is about.
So on extraction in particular, can you explain how these platforms are manipulating, I guess, consumers, sellers, to ensure that they can always be taking a margin, and that margin, how that margin has been ever increasing as well? I think the numbers are quite hard to wrap your head around.
Yes. So maybe I should explain the concept of extraction, which is a little bit complicated. So extraction refers to the taking of wealth or cash or payments or something far, far in excess of cost. Far, far in excess of cost. An example might be like when outside of tech, like, you buy a medicine in the United States in particular. The medicine by now costs almost nothing for the seller to provide, but they charge hundreds of thousands of dollars for it because you need it to get better. So it's any time, extraction happens anytime a business kind of has you over a barrel. It might be an American expression. Kind of has got you, and
it's mafia type shit. Tony Soprano.
I kind of feel like a lot of business has become like that. You look for a situation where you really have got an advantage, and then you turn the dial. And I think that has become what the tech platforms are looking for. Quite less with us, more with the sellers who live on their platforms and do business on their platform. Maybe I could tell the story of Amazon's.
Of course.
As a good example. So, Amazon, once upon a time was a bookstore. I feel like many
moons ago.
I don't know, maybe listeners are not around for that. But it found great success by being a platform, which is to say a place that people could go and sell their stuff to other people, right? That's the Amazon marketplace platform. Very successful. And for a while, I guess early 2010s, it kind of built it up and were actually, I think, a really important medium of wealth distribution in that time. the dream of the internet had always been that, anyone can become rich. You go out there, you start your business, and you make a lot of money. And Amazon was that for a while for people, for sellers. And, I talked about the middle class getting rich. It was that route. And, I told a story in the book about like this barber who lives in the center of the United States. And, he starts selling pomade, like some hair product as a side, kind of takes off, hires more and more people. So, he becomes a millionaire. It was kind of working. It was working. And the key to it was first that Amazon was good, but also Amazon's margins were just like 20% or less. So, you're getting 80 cents on every dollar as the seller. The thing is, once Amazon locked everybody in, particularly in the United States, people really didn't have anywhere to go, especially as sellers. They started turning up the fees, turning the dials, and taking more and more money. And I think the best example of that is Amazon's advertising. So I don't know if you ever like go on Amazon search and you get all these like sponsored links and here's this and whatever. So that's what they call their advertising. And what it is sellers bidding against each other, bidding down their own margins. And it has been a cash cow with very few equivalents in modern history because it costs Amazon almost nothing to do. They just set up this tournament and started earning 10 billion, 20 million. Last year, they earned from that $56 billion.
Just from that one.
From this like
one
weird links.
specific.
From this weird kind of advertising links and like placement and like all that stuff. 56 billion, which just to like in terms of media comparison is double the revenue of every single newspaper on the planet Earth. I was looking recently. It looks like it's going to be over 70 billion this year. Wow. Just in almost pure profit, no costs, just for these weird little manipulations. And the thing is, it makes the search worse. So you're actually paying to degrade the product.
And shitification.
Yeah. It's in shitification. It is. Yeah. I assume we can swear on this.
Oh, yeah. Fucking mess with it.
I was on radio yesterday and I had to call it embleepification.
Can you just explain quickly what embleepification is?
Bleepification is the enshitification of enshitification.
That's class. Corey's going to like that one.
Yeah. Do you want me to really say what
enshitification is? Well, if I understand it correctly, it's the idea that you make things worse because it gives you a profit margin.
Yeah, basically. It's what a company does when they have no discipline, when they're in a monopoly status. Like Amazon, they don't really face competitive pressure. So they can just crank the dials. And like that little thing, almost $70 billion. I mean, it's much more than the revenue of almost entire industries just for this crap that makes things worse. And I think the result has been very obvious, at least in the United States, on sellers. There's no path to riches through being an Amazon seller anymore. People, what they do is they import Chinese goods, mostly been like an outlet for Chinese stuff. And, like that guy selling pomade, he's out of business. He's bankrupt. A lot of the guys who got in early are out, and it's just become a totally different operation. And frankly, it's not like it's impossible to sell on there, but it isn't this kind of wealth distribution, strong middle class thing that I was talking about. It's more like people can get by, but Amazon takes the money.
I just wonder, given that's what you say the internet started out as being, and maybe I'm being a bit conspiratorial about it, but do you think it ever had some planned function to become this oligarchical, God, the bloody word.
Oligarchic
kind of, I don't know, platform by which it once was much more democratic and allowed for, as you say, that wealth creation, but sneaking in behind were always people who were willing to exploit that fact and obviously pursue some form of profit maximization.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's more than one way of thinking about it. And a good way of thinking about it is like, you take people like the Google founders. Back in the day, their motto was, do no evil. They were constantly talking about our only goal is to like organize the world's information. We don't want to play a big role. They had this whole thing that we don't want you to stay in our site. We want you to go somewhere else and find what's out there. They talked about democracy and all this kind of stuff. So was all that just a bunch of horseshit?
Yeah.
That was like disguising the real project? Or, did they mean it? I think personally, and maybe I'm like naive, or that they believed it, but they had other beliefs incompatible with fulfilling that vision. And one of those beliefs is that they needed to be billionaires too. You know, they
needed to win.
They needed to be billionaires. And, you know, as I think the original sin of Silicon Valley and maybe of Americans is this belief you can have your cake and eat it too. And like serve the world, spread democracy, treat your employees amazingly, you know, help all these great causes. And also we're going to be billionaires too. And it's all going to, you know, here's just a small example. If you look at Google's early stuff, and I went back for the book and I read the materials around when they decided to go public. So they decided to become a normal kind of profit-seeking corporation, as opposed to say like Wikipedia, which at that point said, this is going to go badly. We need to be a nonprofit. You know, Jimmy Wales, I give that guy a lot of credit because he had this little button in his bedroom, not a real one, but metaphorically, which he could have pushed and be like, I become a billionaire. You know, and it's pretty hard. In the way he said no, he could have rolled his board like Sam Altman did with.
Well, I was just thinking that Sam Altman's story, the OpenAI story, sounds virtually identical to the Google story, doesn't it?
Yes.
This idea of we're going to be a non-for-profit, we're here to help, you know, humanity evolve.
Yeah.
We're firmly dedicated to kind of almost socialist principles, and now they're a private company with a profit.
I mean,
maximization principle.
OpenAI is almost a bit like a religious organization. That's something I've been writing about, you know, where they're very motivated by this kind of
utopian
idea that we're going to solve. I mean, Sam Altman was in an interview like a year ago, and he said, once we get general AI, I think poverty just ends. Like this moment. But
But you talk about in the book that kind of material technologies reflect the ideological condition of the day.
Yes.
And so when we look at when these organizations, when they were created in the early noughties, late 90s, it was a world of kind of third wayism where to a point you could have your cake and eat it. So why in a period now where there's a lot more constraint, economic constraint, political constraint, all of these limitations that are set, why is it not illogical for them just to have followed that path? Because as I say, isn't it a bit of an inevitability as material economic circumstances change?
I mean, in retrospect, yes.
Well,
but I think that they
hindsight's 2020.
I mean, I went back and I read the letter that Google wrote to its shareholders, and let's just like Google's executives, and it opens like, we're not a normal company. We don't want to become one. We believe in like pursuing projects that make no sense and are going to lose money. We believe like we should treat our employees amazingly. And they also go on about how we think advertising is like corrupting. And they said this earlier, and they, you know, advertising will ruin search. And they really believed that somehow they were going to erase that basic trade-off between quality and like making money. They believed you could serve two masters, despite the warnings in scripture. They thought they were the exceptions to the rule.
They were going to walk through the eye of the needle.
Yeah, they thought they were the ones who could like somehow, if you go on Google now, there's a lot of ads and it's not made it better. But they thought, I guess they were the chosen ones who could like do what no one has ever done. So for a while it kind of worked. It's like Wile E. Coyote running off the cliff before you fall down. But eventually they had promised their masters, their owners, investors, that they would continue to double and double profit. So all that shit they wrote in the letter, almost every promise was broken in that letter. So is it, going back, was it a conspiracy theory, or was it, you know, kind of intense self-delusion powered by huge piles of money? I mean, billionaire, it's kind of, how many of us could resist that, you know, billionaire button? Very few, it turns out. And go ahead.
Is it that is it that story of you have noble intentions, and then as you accrue more power, you realize that you can just do whatever you want? I mean, I'm quite struck by Sarah Wynne Williams' memoir, right, about Mark, and she talks about Mark Zuckerberg and the top team around them. Yeah. And the way she describes them is as these people who just kind of don't care. Right. You know, like they've climbed to the top of the mountain. Powerful. Yeah. They've climbed to the top of the mountain. They just think, well, look, we can do whatever we want now. Yeah. And that when he was receiving information about how Facebook was being manipulated and was essentially kind of a tool for genocide, it was kind of just like,
Yeah.
We can
But
do
they can
that.
wash their hands of accountability at the
It's
same
just
time.
like we're capable of doing that. We're capable of, when they're finding out that they're literally rigging elections for autocrats. And you have a great line in the book, don't you, about how the internet was created for this kind of democratization, socialist utopia. We're all going to more connectivity. And since the invention of the internet, democracies have started to die and autocracies have started to rise. And Zuckerberg finds out that Facebook is being used to manipulate elections, and his reaction is, "Oh, so we can do that? We're able to do that." Isn't that? It's just
that is just
me.
mad. Yeah, of course.
It's absolutely mental to me. And these guys are not. I guess that they're not held up as, when people talk about the evil billionaires or whatever. I think some people think of Musk, sure, because of his quite.
Well, because he's quite
politics.
abrasive politics, yeah.
But I don't think people think of Zuckerberg in the same breath.
But it's the benign dictatorship that I think we all find ourselves existing within, that we don't even recognise what I would argue to be this immense level of cruelty that isn't really accounted for, because their platforms can just do, as you say, genocide, instigating autocracy, overthrowing governments, whatever it may be. And they can just be sat in Washington or Silicon Valley or whatever and be like, yeah, it's fine. It's all good by me.
Yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley and even inside Google, early stage in there, early Google. I spent a summer there, actually, early Google. And already it was starting to kind of change inside. And I mean, there are all these stereotypes about being in a bubble and, no one ever telling you things you don't want to hear. They're all kind of true, know.
Yeah.
We're getting interest in weird hobbies that once you get a lot of money, and not having anyone really slow you down. I also think something did change. There was a real shift. I think Peter Thiel and Elon Musk have a role in this, where the playing the nice guy thing, they kind of gave up on it at one point. I think they noticed one thing that's true about these guys, they are competitive interpersonally. And one thing that people don't talk about this as much, but a lot of the founders did not take as big a share in their companies as they could have. If Jeff Bezos probably could have taken more, the Google guys probably could, but they felt like that wasn't the thing to do. Elon just took a ton of Tesla, and then he got richer than them on what they regard as a less important and impressive company. So how come this guy's getting away with the shit? How come he? So anyway, I think that's part of it.
Do you think Elon revealed the face of the system that we're living in, which is that, that maxim of greed is good actually was always underlying this false appearance from Gates and Buffett that we were going to be doing the giving pledge and we were going to be philanthropic giving billionaires. I mean, fair play to Bill Gates. He said he's going to give away his wealth, and I don't really hold him onto the same level as the others. But it's like Gates is the one who is profiting from the same twisted tactics that enable you to win and is using it for redistributive purposes. But fundamentally, by participating, you're not changing the rules of engagement.
It's so weird how it is so much like high school.
Literally.
Yeah.
They're just people, aren't they?
I know. People who are good and play by the rules and try to be good, and then there's some dude in the corner, smoking pot and getting the girls or whatever, and you're like, why is that guy getting this stuff? And then it kind of warps everybody, and then it warps everybody, and unfortunately the rest of us. Now the difference is in a high school they affect the other guys in the class. Here they affect us. But yeah, anyway, maybe we should get back to
I mean, so if we go back to the book, so we've explained a bit about extraction, we've explained what these tech companies are doing. What do you think is happening to us as a society? I think your main concern is that we could be moving towards a feudal society, an idea that there are two tiers of citizen, people on, let's say, the inside of these platforms who maybe work for them, the engineers and so forth, who will be very much compensated for their work, and people who are their subjects and their consumers, and who are addicted, to be clear, to these platforms. They cannot extract themselves from it.
I think you've stated it very, very well. I do think we are on a trajectory which is not good, as you suggest, and it is one where more and more of the economy is monopolized, and where business itself transforms, something I describe in the book, away from sort of this idea you provide better services or better, invent a better taco or something or whatever, and then sell it for more, and more in a world where you try to kind of lock people into some ecosystem. It's kind of like, imagine you're permanently at Heathrow Airport or something, and then after a while you get used to that, and like you eat there, and you
sleep,
and everything is there, and you're kind of in this little world, and that business becomes more about extraction than it does about providing value, if that makes sense. Like that's the fundamental difference between two types of economy that you can live in. And then you have, as you said, a divide between essentially the extractors and their major employees and those who own large amounts of stock in them. Then everyone else, and I'm not saying people are starving, but living a little like we recognize today, sort of barely able to afford things. Maybe the extraction mechanisms for like prices adjust, so you're always kind of paying as much as you can. That's become a recent thing. You're always kind of stretched at your limit because prices are customized almost to your limit. And you're kind of, and maybe there's basic support programs so you don't die or starve, but you don't really have a chance of becoming your own economic entity.
Yeah.
You're stuck in there. And I think like things have gone that direction the last 5-10 years. And, unless we do something about it, it's going to get worse.
I think one of the things that is crucial to being a human that is lacking as a consequence of this stuff is the self-actualization point, is the fact that you are just so restricted from self-expression, political expression, economic emancipation, or whatever that looks like. And obviously this is an element of it, but it's always still constrained to me by the very material and traditional elements of modern capitalism, the kind of political forces that support this encroaching feudalism, and then the social constraints, what we're seeing now in the US and in the UK and across Europe, which is a cultural vibe that is being planted and exploited in order for people to obviously be more fractured. With all of those things in play, I guess, how does one actually navigate it? Because I think for people like us, and I'm sure for many of our viewers, it's just very overwhelming.
Yes. Well, first I want to agree with something you said, particularly the stress on the material. I do think, this might be a fancy way of putting it, that our consciousness is materially determined. Maybe that's a fancy way of saying that, like, how you... whether you feel free and whether you feel like you're really a member of society does depend a little bit on whether you have a decent amount of wealth or whether you're just getting by.
A bit of Hegel. That's my thing.
Yeah,
that is my thing.
It's a little bit like, even 200 years ago, a farmer at least owns their own land and has their own decision-making power, is a better position to me than someone who's, stretched working 80 hours a week and barely getting by, even though in theory they might, the 20th century person might, or 21st century person might be on paper wealthier, but in terms of their true freedom, be a lot poorer. And, maybe you'll have freedom of speech, but who wants to be like a homeless person on the side of the street screaming about like their political viewpoints? You need to have a material base in order to feel like a real citizen. That's what I believe. What could we do? We need, this gets into the politics of it and relates to our earlier conversation, is we need leaders who are dedicated to breaking a system which is impoverishing everybody, and I guess the short version. I have specific ideas what you need to do in terms of laws, but in terms of politics, it's hard to find people who are truly committed to on the left to a broad rise of the middle class. But we have done it before. Actually, frankly, things were in many ways worse 100 years ago. And we did have, labor unions. We did have the Labor Party. We had
New Deal.
A New Deal in the U.S. We had the progressive movement. We have done this before. And that's what gives me kind of some optimism. It got bad. The U.S. was really bad. When you read the histories of the Gilded Age United States, you had this tiny number of monopolists who also had their own weird religion, a little bit like the AI religion now, which was all about social evolution and how wealthy people were kind of evolutionarily leaving behind poor people. There were a lot of people who, they believed in that period in a lot of selective breathing and like trying
But the
Eugenicist
corollaries to
ideas.
now are really
Yeah.
striking, aren't they?
Yeah.
People are talking about living to 150 in the
Yes.
in the very top 1%. They're thinking about themselves through the classic lens of Gattaca and eugenics,
Yeah.
really, about
Right.
how do you preserve these specific traits,
Yeah.
which they think will lead to greater prosperity for their future generations.
I mean,
And they're talking about 8 generations of wealth. It used to be people would talk about 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And it is, for me, clearly a hubristic response to the unfettered power that these people are able to engage in. I wanted to ask him because you were in the Biden administration, you were his special advisor about antitrust. And antitrust is this idea about how we need to prevent monopolies, because what monopolies do is they kill off competition.
Yes.
And they concentrate power.
Yes.
And so you were essentially the top kind of lawyer, I guess, advising the government about what they should do and what policies they should pursue. But ostensibly, to us, it feels like we failed on that front, because what we're talking about now is the concentration of reinforced monopolies.
Right.
Why did it fail?
And I'll just add, is it within the legalistic framework to displace these monopolies, or is it something explicitly that has to be done through politics?
Let me answer the first question. So first, I don't think it has. I would challenge the premise that we failed. We are still in the fight, I feel like. It is a hard fight. I think we knew it would be a hard fight. We thought, as you said, anti-monopoly, antitrust, they mean the same thing, by the way, is a tool invented during the progressive era, 100 more years ago, when particularly the United States was overcome with monopoly. And monopolies are bad for a lot of reasons that we talked about, is they mean a couple people running the economy and are frankly highly anti-democratic. We tamed them 100 years ago. We thought we could tame them again. I don't think that fight is over. I think we've had successes and failures. And I don't think we'll know, 10 or 20 years from now. It's definitely too early to give up. What we did is we rejuvenated the laws. We put in the agent law enforcement people who were Lena Khan, Jonathan Cantor, people who were really willing to enforce the laws. And we took our swings at Facebook, Google. We still have cases against Amazon, Apple, basically every big tech company. We've lost some of the cases, so I cannot deny that. But I don't think it's over, I guess. I think we're in the middle of the fight. And ultimately, I think, speaking at least in the United States, I think there is still a residual hatred of monopoly. And whether it has to happen by lawsuit or whether it's legislation or what it is, I think people want to tame an unaccountable power in their lives that feels like it's impoverishing them.
Well, it feels like tyranny, doesn't it?
Economic tyranny. I agree. I'm a big believer in economic democracy. And we're very sensitive to the idea of having a king rule. There's a king here, but like a king without parliament ruling, or a dictator. But we're somehow it's fine to have I don't think it's fine to have a monopoly. It's very similar, is what I'm trying to say.
But it's not capitalism, is it? I mean, really,
That's true.
what we've got now. I mean, Adam Smith wrote precisely to avoid.
Well, the theory of moral sentiments is literally, how do you create a democratic system of capitalism to alleviate the burdens of the poorest in society?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you mentioned de Tocqueville as well
Yeah,
in your book. And these are the founding fathers of Western civilization and our modern economy, that I think their ideas have to be embraced on the left because of the circumstances that we're in. But the idea that we're entertaining a model of capitalism that can just be tamed, I think, maybe through sole lawsuits or political expression, it requires something significantly grander and a bit more ostentatious in trying to fight back against it. Would you not say, like an actual intellectual movement similar to what we saw in the Enlightenment period of Burke and otherwise?
Yes. I feel like Adam Smith is one of the most misunderstood figures in Western intellectual history. I think that, frankly, the left, or people who believe in something other than feudalism, have to both understand the advantages of capitalism as a tool of wealth creation, but then not embrace the idea that it means that a few monopolists and a small class gets to run society. And somewhere, there's a lot of room between that. But a lot of people, on the right will say, well, you have to embrace capitalism, and that's why you have to accept that everyone's going to be poor except for these guys. And I reject that, I guess. Yeah.
The irony comes, though, is America was founded on some of these ideas. Thomas Paine, some of Smithsonian economics. All of this idea is very much within an American tradition as much as it is British. I don't understand why there is such an oversight to embrace those things, because they could be originally American. Well,
they're
of course, outside of that, but
I would say it comes and goes. Right. It's a very, it's hard. The founders were completely anti-monopoly. This whole Tea Party thing that you read about was an anti-monopoly protest against the British Parliament for imposing a monopoly on tea, and there's always been this back and forth. In fact, it goes for these cycles. Like Americans love business, and then it turns into monopoly, and then they want to overthrow it and seize control by the people again. That's why I'm kind of optimistic in the sense that I feel like things are going far enough that there is a very powerful populist, movement in the United States. I think here too. I think this relates to earlier conversation about a Labor Party is not failing to seize this. People are fed up with the way the economy works for them. Nobody wants to be poorer than their parents, and it's like humiliating. And it's a betrayal of kind of like the dream of what this was supposed to be all about. So I think that it's there. It just has to be harnessed.
The thing that I am quite concerned by is that Peter Thiel has almost the most accurate reading of why people are becoming disenchanted with capitalism. Mm-hmm. There's a leaked memo, I think it's from about 4 or 5 years ago, where he says, it appears to me that the rise of popularity of socialist ideas amongst young people is a reaction to them being unable to accrue assets over their lifetime, because the jobs market that we're moving into, especially with the advent of AI as well, talk about graduate joblessness, is one in which these people don't have any real likelihood of aspirational material change, that they'll have social mobility, etc. And so the response to that is they just spend their money. A lot of people in my generation don't save money because they don't see it as possible for them to actually one day own a home if they're not going to be inheriting intergenerational wealth. So he gets it, which makes me concerned that he saw it 5 years ago, because I'm sure he's tried to figure out what is the solution to this.
And the economic picture today looks that 10% of people our age are unemployed. This is a growing problem. 5% of the British workforce is unemployed, 10% of our generation. This is going to continue to magnify until there is a bold response. And the greatest sin, I think, of the Labour Party is to suggest that some of these bold, radical, economic populist ideas are antithetical to what the Labour Party should be trying to do in government, and to delegitimize what are quite essentialist positions about how we structurally just reform society, not to overthrow capitalism, but as you say, to expand a sense of the middle classes at least, is, I think, increasingly hard to defend, because it's not doing what it's there to do, which is serve the interests of the majority of people in this country, I guess.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think that, as an outsider, I see a nostalgia, people of that age, which, I'm closer to that age, for like the Tony Blair 90s, everything's going to be great. And so maybe they just hope you go back to the old formula and then everything's great again. But the problem is that formula led to the current situation. Mm-hmm. And I think that is the fundamental problem.
Globalization led to the deindustrialization of these.
But it facilitated this ballooning oligarchic class. Where they could take advantage. I mean, infamously, Peter Mandelson, I don't care how rich you get, as long as you pay your taxes, suggests that there is no responsibility of capitalists outside of just paying what the state expects you to pay. And that is as you say, the culture that we've grown up in, and that has exacerbated inequality and has allowed the state to turn a bit of a blind eye to exponential concentrations of wealth and power, both in the UK and over in the United States as well.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
I think there's something kind of underlying a lot of your analysis in your book, which is that, even neoliberalism had this idea that it wasn't like a moralistic framework in some ways, that it wasn't trying to tell people what was good and what they should do. But it's like any form of economic settlement that we have is fundamentally going to put some things on a pedestal and some things not. Yes. And I guess what we've now seen through this laissez-faire capitalism is that if self-interest is put first, you get monopolies. You get people who go extraction, enrichment. Those are the only things that matter. Competition is the only thing that matters. And I think it's quite interesting how these platforms themselves have created this world of, you know, low friction, high addiction.
Yeah.
You know, you can't wean yourself off of it. That children who've had iPads experience withdrawal now when it's taken away.
Yes.
Like behavioral changes, etc. It feels as if we've entered a very kind of dystopic framework where the only thing that matters is how long something can hold your attention, and whether you can either game it, right, bet on it. Look at Cauchy, Polymarket. I mean, with the state of that you've kind of these companies, they're going to become one company eventually. But there's a sense that everything in life now must be bet on, must be releasing dopamine. You know, there should be no friction.
Well, let me ask you and your listeners to reflect on a question, which is, how much do you really control your own attention? Like, how often do you go sit down in front of your computer or your phone, and you're like, I'm going to write this one email, and then like 3 hours go by, and you cannot account for that time. I mean, and we often say time is our most precious resource, but like, how often is just like sucked out of you, and you're like, what the hell just happened? And I feel that's like the experience of living today, is that you're constantly being kind of extracted from, you know, and that's a way. If you want to ask, like, okay, how are the platforms taking from me, or how is it, you know, how am I suffering here? It is, I think, in this commercialization, this taking of your attention. And you might have thought, oh, you know, what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend the day, you know, hanging out with my friends or something, or I'm going to read a book or listen to something. And then instead it's, you know, frittered away on nonsense. Or you find yourself buying some random thing you didn't really think like you were going to buy, or I don't know. I have this experience. And I think that is kind of captures this extractive thing in our time, is that we've totally lost control over our attention.
One of the almost eccentric elements to all of that as well is we've become less accommodating of other people's time. So where we've lost time for ourselves, I think we're becoming so expectant that other people should give us their time. So all those emails you're talking about, can you get back within the next whatever? You feel the obligation to respond to WhatsApp as quickly as possible. You have to see what's going on in the news over here on Twitter. And so not only are you giving your attention endlessly to these things, they also are taking so much from you that you're forced to engage and respond in a way that, as I say, is just so overwhelming and stressful for many people.
Yeah.
And James Marriott, who writes for The Times, said recently, reflecting on lowering literacy rates, that reality is a thing that happens around screen time.
That is a good way of putting it. Man, you guys are making me depressed.
Welcome to the show, mate.
Yeah.
One of our listeners recently said that he couldn't listen anymore because it was depressing him too much. So we had a comedian on last episode to cheer him up.
But I think, you know, as people always say, awareness is the first thing. And honestly, seizing back, you were asking me earlier, like, what could you do? And one of the things to do individually, I mean, politically, I think you need a movement with someone who is you know, gets it and wants to, and credibly, you know, it's like untouchable, you know, credibly is not going to like get there and then realize that his campaign donations are all coming from big tech, or he feels like he has to obey them. Yeah. So that's one thing. But I think personally, individually, it starts with trying to recapture control over your own attention and take sovereignty over your own life. You know, what does that look like? When I was writing, not this book, another book, I tried just kind of like keeping track of, like for a month, of how I spend my attention. And it was kind of interesting. Like the same way you might think about your money. Yeah. Like, how do I actually spend my money? And is this how I want to spend it? You know, you might think, how do I spend my hours? And do I really think like arguing with people on Reddit is like, or like getting in weird Twitter battles?
Is that what you've been up to? on reviews of Tim Wu's book? Is this actually really fucking good? Dickhead.
Or whatever it is. Or like, I don't know. Or just like getting angry about like whatever Trump did yesterday, some stupid thing, and like spending an hour on that or whatever. Actually, on Reddit, I like to read the alien subreddits.
I've seen you mention that before.
Yeah, I just kind corpses. Of like alien corpses. I'm just like interested. They have this whole like, I get really interested in these subcultures. So maybe, but I feel like at least I choose to spend that time there. But it's more like when you're not really choosing how you, and it's the same with spending your money. Imagine you found out you were like spending thousands of dollars on subscriptions that you had forgotten about.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a little like that with attention.
But I think we've got low dopamine addiction. And
Right.
what I mean by that is, people, and I've said this before on the show, you'll order a Wingstop and have a wank.
Oh,
Do you know what I mean? Like on a Sunday. And in those,
Treat to
both
yourself.
those moments, you'll think this is brilliant. And then it finishes and
Immediately after.
you feel like you've been extracted, something's been extracted from you. You don't feel edified by the experience, right? And I think a lot of young men in particular, because of our hormone cycles,
Right.
which are different to young women, and we need high levels of dopamine.
Instigates
release.
immediacy and the sense of now, and if not now, then I'm late, or whatever it may be.
It's just impulsive,
Yeah, it's
isn't it?
impulsive, that's right.
And
yeah.
I think if it's impulsive, that speaks to, as you're saying, a lack of control and agency. And to bring back to your point around self-actualization, this idea of, we are determining our own identities. There's something really interesting that's happened where these platforms themselves have become bigger and greater by selling us an identity.
Yeah.
By your Instagram feed is a curation that you think that you
You've
have
put
some
out,
control over,
yeah.
but they've obviously been feeding you something on an algorithm, which is essentially either selling you to some advertising, or if you're like us and we're a show, we eventually going to have to make some money, and you're going to have to pay us for the
Right.
content.
I think that you're selling a quality product and trying to find customers for it, and I think that's reasonable. I mean, I don't think like doing business is evil.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think if this is a restaurant and you're trying to, create food that people want to eat, what's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with business, is what I want to say.
And it goes to the
Yeah.
beginning, I think, of your book, the kind of platform, the court, the public forum by which
Yeah.
civil discussion happens. That has been taken away from us. We don't have the pub. We lament the loss or the breakdown of pubs in the
Or third
country.
spaces.
Yeah, or third spaces. And to a point, you talk about the attention stuff, but the public forum is now on your phone or on your laptop or somewhere. So you've almost got to be there, if not because you want to be there, because you feel as though to stay connected in the world, this is where it's happening, really.
Yes. That's I guess was the opening. Yes, that's what this book is about. It's about the pub. Okay, let's take the pub. So they made some money. You bought some beer, whatever. That was part of it. But it wasn't like they were surveilling your conversation, trying to advertise to you in every little second. I guess pubs sort of want you to stay there, but it's not the same kind of.
It's not as effective, is it?
Yeah, it's just not the same.
But it's
and
not
you're actually
transactional.
physically with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that is just totally, like, pubs are quasi-commercial, but this is like the full commercialization of every second, extraction from it. But I want to say about this about the men thing. I mean, I was thinking this when you were talking. I was like, what kind of man are you really if you cannot control your own time? That is yours. You can't like control what you do with your time. Like, what is more essential to being who you are, right? What is more, what is a better definition of your autonomy or freedom that you can actually choose what you do with your time? It's very fundamental when I think about it.
It was the driving
Yeah.
force, I guess, behind the union movement itself, was to create time.
Yes, that's right.
To create the weekend, to create holiday,
Yes.
to create workers' rights. That was responsive to the fact that you weren't able to control your time because you were in hock to the capitalist.
It is crazy to read that night, just on the theme that things actually were worse once. You read that 19th century stuff,
Oh, yeah.
and the movement. What was a movement for like a 14-hour work day?
Yeah.
They were like
Chimney sweeps, mate. What the fuck?
I know.
Yeah, like
Little
kids literally being
chuck 'em
shoved
down
down
a
a-
chim-
I know.
chuck 'em
Man.
down a chimney.
And
know.
some of the movements were like, and no, like children under the age of 10 shouldn't be working more than 12 hours a day.
Yeah,
And you're like,
crazy.
that's what
I know.
What the-
But I guess that's why meliorative views, that's the idea that humanity's always improving, almost inevitably improving, have become quite in vogue, I think, is that you do look over the longue durée and you think actually things have got better. But we're not destined for better.
No.
And it feels right now that the pathway we're onto is worse. And I'm struck by, if we are living in the death of neoliberalism and we're living in its embers, what comes next?
Yes.
Right? And I feel like, and you're the best person to answer this question, but this idea has been popping around my head, which is that America, we're, as Europeans, we really do just have to follow what America decides. 25% of our economy is contingent
Why
on
do you
the
guys say
US.
this? I am so shocked, having spent the last 6 months in Europe, how like Europe seems to have forgotten.
Yeah, a sense
it
of
has its own
itself.
sovereignty.
It's
and
its own like
identity.
identity,
Yeah.
like this idea that we
have.
can't do anything, and we're too disorganized, and like, and the UK is even worse, maybe because of Brexit, whatever. But Europe is just as bad. They're just like, whatever's going to happen, it's going to be. But China and the US are like in charge.
Brexit was just a way to bring the UK away from a sovereign Europe into a vassalized form of American capitalism, because the view of the people who were pro-Brexit was America has growth, and it's not the Enoch Powell return to empire view. It was we need to choose a side here,
ally ourselves with.
and choose the ones who decide where capitalism goes, which is kind of what I'm trying to say. With America.
I just imagine you had this friend who was like kind of muscular and strong, maybe a little bit older. And was always like, oh, I can't do anything. I'm too weak and whatever. And I'm like, you are the largest economy in the world.
Yeah,
and you have
market.
And you have the most. Well, you're the largest. I think Europe collectively has the largest gross national product, and certainly has the most consumers, wealthy consumers. Has the most educated, probably the most educated along the United States and China population in the world. Like it's certainly one of the three big. Compare yourself to South America or something. There's no comparison. Yet there's always this like, well, we can't do anything. And I find that crazy because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I think you have to look at where Europe has emerged from. I mean, the most recent iteration of Europe was the biggest imperialist experiment that had taken place at any point in history. And so this idea, I think, has emerged since the decline of empire, the decolonial movements, the fact that there are demographic changes. I don't think it should be a cause for a dispirited view about how we see ourselves. I think actually it should be one for optimism. But the economic kind of story, I think, predicates any discussion around that. And then we just want to ally ourselves with these.
I feel like I'm talking to, like it's that same idea. You're talking to this, strong person who's like, I can't fight, like a boxer who you look at him and like is muscular and like should be able to win. But for some reason is like cowed, because Europeans, and it's not just here. The UK is obviously broken off and it's smaller, and so I get. But even in Europe, they're just like, we can't win. Yeah, no, maybe it's because I don't know. Anyway, I just noticed that. I'll just put it right there.
I think it's a really fascinating conundrum that we find ourselves in, where the argument would be from America was that social democracy has created a laziness. That's their view, right? Is that because we're not just driven by profit maximization, because we're happy to extend and enlarge the welfare state, you've created a people who aren't interested in developing, being entrepreneurs, etc. And the talent, as we know, go to America. Like if you're a top quality, if you're Piers Morgan and you've climbed to the top of the
why
pyramid,
would you be here?
You go to the US.
Why would you be here?
Because you want because the incentive is unfettered money, maximize your power
themselves.
And reach and whatever. And we've not been the hub for that. I think it's really interesting that like DeepMind, which is the UK's only AI company, we sold it to America, to Google, right?
It's also crazy that the government let that happen.
I know.
I mean, in the
America
US,
would never do that.
No, we would have blocked it for some reason. We would have said national security, but we would have known it. Well, in a way, it is national security. Look at like TikTok. After a while, someone realized, wait a second, you have a Chinese company that's top social network. We can't have China own that company. Yeah. So the United States is, whatever it might say, is pretty straightforward about that stuff. I was surprised when they were like, oh, okay, we'll just sell DeepMind.
But I think it speaks to that thing that we're discussing right now, which is a very specious understanding of what we're capable of, and a sense that we have to follow America because they're the hegemon. That's aspirational to a sense, that to be part of this
and
team.
They're English speaking, so it makes it so much easier for us to engage in there. I think that is something to be said. I mean, nowhere in Europe speaks English like in the UK, so
there's a real misunderstanding of China as well. In Europe.
Well, the Dutch speak English pretty well, but your take is. But you were asking me a question before I interrupted
you.
Yeah,
sorry. The original
accused
question,
you guys of being cowards.
Well, we are. And it's fair. But the question I wanted to ask you was whether you thought that America is on a pathway to a form of state capitalism akin to China in the respect of complete access to data, so they are able to track citizens. You've seen Larry Ellison talk publicly recently, and Tony Blair's always been a big fan of this idea of basically of social credits. Really,
the police will be on their best behavior because we're constantly watching and recording everything that's going on. Citizens will be on their best behavior.
Which obviously I think sounds quite Orwellian and dystopian, but this sense that America's becoming increasingly illiberal to the concept that they have to have a different idea of the current oligarchic capitalism the extractive capitalism that we're describing. I feel like you can envisage a world in 5-10 years time where it really is illegal to kind of talk about these things in a way that brings disrepute to the system itself, or talks about overthrowing the system itself.
Or you know how it works a little more granularly? As someone who has a lot of Chinese friends, academic friends, it's more you just get very nervous about wanting to talk about these topics. It's
the hesitation.
It's sort of
chilling effects.
Yeah, the self-censorship that takes over. Do I think we're heading that? So let me say a few things. I think American capitalism is changing. Is becoming more nakedly nationalistic, obviously, but also more like command capitalism, which is sort of the Stalinist or 30s German or Chinese model, where the state is very involved in like what's going to happen.
State-planned economy, essentially.
Yeah, it's not full. The state is directing. Mussolini had a lot of ideas in this idea, which is he felt like this, industry needed some great leader who like pointed the way. It's different than communism, where the state owns the means of production and like makes it happen. It's more like they take orders from the chief, and you can clearly see that in the Trump administration's thinking. And I also agree with you. There's been this ongoing change in Silicon Valley, where once upon a time it was a very libertarian kind of, we need to stay away from government. We should not. Some places like Apple never had a DC office because they were worried about getting corrupted and getting into the game and becoming like defense contractors. Now they just want to be defense contractors. And whatever that libertarian impulse was, it's broken down. Peter Thiel's hilarious in the sense that here he is, this like great libertarian whose main client is government, and it's like totally embrace government. It's the weirdest like Orwellian thing. We talk about Orwellian in terms of being backwards.
Yeah,
it's a bunch of libertarians who want to use government to control you.
How concerned should we be about Palantir?
I think it's one of those things where it's less like there's this conspiracy cabal that Peter Thiel is organizing the monitoring of everyone's brain, and more like he's writing software that is being adapted by a lot of he and Carp that is being used for dark purposes. And I think it starts with illegal immigration and trying to find people, and spreads into just a broader idea of we need to keep tabs on everyone. So it's less like I think Palantir is masterminding it, and more that they are the portal between Silicon Valley and government.
Yeah.
Because, having worked in government, there's another set of government contractors who are also providing like IT, and they generally are very old-fashioned, basically like bad. And what Palantir does is it creates a channel between the top Silicon Valley kind of tech and government. And I guess that's kind of scary.
You know who the leader of Palantir UK is? The CEO?
No.
He's Oswald Mosley's grandson.
Really?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It's
that and the name Palantir. That's what's crazy about it. The name Palantir is this all-seeing eye from
the thing. Exactly
Tolkien.
from Lord of the Rings, right?
Yeah.
And also I think that the goal of Palantir, right, for essentially, I would assume they've been lobbying behind the scenes for something like digital ID.
Uh-huh.
It's very much in their kind of wheelhouse.
Oh, yeah.
And then Starmer goes to roll it out, and they go, we would not be involved in implementing that. Basically twisting the knife and saying, you're on the way down.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
even we, without any oversight, because obviously they're not a government entity, they're a private company. Even we won't do this for you because we'd much rather do it with reform.
Well, indeed, yeah.
You know,
Really?
that's what I
Is
think.
that
That's
right?
I think that's the implication. I think the implication, because if you think about what reforms politics are, they're talking about cozying up between us. Our
Yeah.
system of governance and the states, right, and the Trump administration and MAGA, and they're all in bed together, sharing information, you know, tactics, very kind of nefarious ones, I think, as well, things that we wouldn't countenance as progressives.
Am I wrong to hope or think there's a little more resistance in the British population to MAGA-like thinking, or is that hopeless?
I think instinctively
optimism?
there is. I think Britain has a kind of dampened populism. There isn't a political populist project that I think British people can get behind. I think the big idea stuff around the economy, absolutely people can get behind. I don't think there is much appetite for a MAGA-esque thing. And this is why I think, to a point, reform may have hit a bit of a ceiling at the moment. Who knows, in a couple of years' time, we might see what happens. But that appetite probably is only about 35% of the country, which...
Well, that's what we said about hardcore Trump supporters. You know, I would say we thought there was just like 32%, 33 who are hardcore dedicated, and then, but anyway, yeah.
But I think Trump managed to win over that, you know, that person who just thinks, well, look, I've got a portfolio of stocks, and I might not like his style, but there's a couple of things he says that are funny. And broadly on the cultural stuff, I do probably lean a bit more to that socially conservative as opposed to the ultra liberal. And they go, all right, I'll vote for him.
It's also who you're facing down as your opposition as well.
Yeah,
though.
we fumbled that.
Yeah, you
that's the
fucked
problem.
that up. You guys
That's the
fucked
biggest
that
challenge.
up.
That was the supreme.
But were you not thinking, like, when you were seeing, you know, you were working for Biden, were you not thinking, Joe,
This
you've
guy
been an
needs to-
incredible steward, political career of over 50
Years,
years.
yeah, I know. Just give
Take
it up.
a break.
Yeah, give it
Take a
up.
break.
You know, it is an interesting thing to look back your own life and realize when you have drunk the Kool-Aid or have been kind of brainwashed in some ways. And I got to say that we were all, I mean, part about being in a White House or any kind of political thing is you're like a team, you're sort of embattled, right? You need to stick together. And whoever your leader is, like, he's your leader and you're going to be loyal to him. And like, these are necessary kind of factors. And so it's not like out here where you can like kind of, it's like a sports, you know, you don't, when you're in the middle of a season, it's very disruptive
Yeah, of course.
to being like, you know, let's fire the coach or whatever, you know, like that. So you have to kind of be loyal to function well. And so, you know, Joe Biden, I kind of thought there's young guy way of doing politics and like old guy way. And young guy way is more like Obama was. I also worked in the Obama White House, and he's like into everything, and he's super energetic, and you know he wants to get into the details. And there's like old guy way where you sort of set a direction, and then you let other people do the grunt work. And you know he was in command, Joe. Like he was our boss. You know he told us what he wanted, and then we sort of did it.
And then he forgot.
Was he an active boss though? That's what. Yeah,
he was active. I mean, that's the thing. I think first of all, I was there for the first 2 years.
Okay. I was there. It did get worse.
I think it got worse.
Yeah.
I was there for the first 2 years, and you know he was in charge, and we'd beaten Trump. That was a big deal. The reason that he stayed on, I think, and the reason that the idea was to run again was a little bit down to this like boxing match thinking, which is we beat that guy before, we can beat him again. Like I think to this day, if you could go ask Joe Biden, he probably would have said, I think I could have beat him again. You know what I mean?
Now.
Because he beat him before. He did beat him before. I mean, people have forgotten that.
Yeah. But I mean, it got really bad towards the end.
It got bad. The debate was a total disaster.
Well, it was well engineered by whoever was inside to say this is our only moment to
get rid of
change
him.
course,
Yeah.
basically. And to be fair,
No, it wasn't well engineered.
You don't think so?
No, we should have either.
You should have had primaries.
We should have either. Okay, so in retrospect, we should have either, completely avoided anything and just like wheeled around, not gone to any debates, and just like
Done your own
really
thing.
give him the speech and just like tried to win on that, kept Joe Biden in.
But then he would have had to be president.
Based on the idea, he could have left after. But, based on the idea that he is, he's a working class guy. A lot of people look at him, working class, like white guy with real working class roots from the middle of the country that people like. Like he's not
He's a normal American.
He's like an honest, good guy. So maybe if we just kept wheeling him around, kept him out of questioning, and that would have been a good strategy. Or we should have much earlier. Hindsight's 2020.
I mean, that's
and then had a
obviously,
selection and maybe had Gavin Newsom, all these guys like Kamala.
But my understanding was that the team around Biden were quality and thought that they'd done a good job.
Yes.
And so there was this sense, and this is natural, rational self-interest. And I think we're probably seeing it right now
at
with,
the moment,
with the current Labour
establishment,
where these people, they really are doing their best.
Mm-hmm.
There's some things that they've got right, but no one's giving them credit for.
That's absolutely fair to say.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And I think that they go, well, look, we are the only people for the job, so we've got to keep going, and this is the team. And the thing about, I think people don't understand about politics, they think, well, you're all under a Democratic or a Labour slate. But the teams are very different.
Yeah.
Between who gets elected into that office.
Yeah.
You see people who are really actually sometimes underqualified for roles be very senior.
Yeah, very senior.
Just because they joined that person's office very
at
early
the right
on.
time. Yeah.
And it's very, it's quite interesting that happens. But I think that explains some of the quite cynical actions that are taken, which are less country first.
Well, they're rooted around protecting a leader and protecting a project that they feel deeply attached to. And what's happening today seems almost emblematic of what happened in the Biden era, which was people, as you say, decent, honest, who want to do a good job, but don't really recognize when the show's starting to come to a close, or when it's time for them to say, is this actually helping the country, my party, and the people we're there to represent, or am I just hubristically staying in place?
Well, one thing I would also, if I was trying to give advice to the Labour Party, well, it is still a little bit early, honestly.
No, definitely.
I've been sort of surprised a little bit being here, where everyone's, what is it? How long? A year? A little more?
Year and a half.
Everyone's like, this whole thing's over, and it's. I guess you don't need 4 or 5 years, but whatever. That's I've noticed
British
that
cynicism, isn't it?
But there is that. The one lesson that can be learned is you have, if in terms of political campaigns, you almost have to be oppositional. If things have sucked, you have to be oppositional to win.
Yeah,
and. Kamala Harris could not run oppositionally against herself.
Yeah.
And that was one of the big disasters, is we couldn't have her running against. She just couldn't credibly say,
as an insurgent.
I've not been, exactly.
The Biden administration screwed up all this stuff. She couldn't say that. She, like inflation. She couldn't run against inflation because we'd been there. I don't think inflation was anybody's fault. It happened to everybody, but you had to run against it.
Yeah. But inflation times immigration is an unwinnable ticket, right?
Yeah, the immigration stuff was rough. But the point is you had to run against it, and there was no way for her to do that. So I think for British politics, it means they either have to, hope that things are better, and then you keep the leadership, or you, have some kind of contest or someone who can run against, who in the general campaign can say, look, they screwed this all up, whatever it was. Yeah.
Do you think, as someone who once stood for US mayor,
Lieutenant Governor.
Lieutenant Governor, right?
Lieutenant Governor.
So you ran against Cuomo?
Kathy Hochul and Andrew Cuomo.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so explain that to us as someone who's kind of done a campaign in one of the most important, seats in the country. What did you like about it? Why did you want to go into public office? And obviously you haven't run again since. Would you ever consider it again?
Yeah. So, the way everyone answers that question is no current plans. But maybe I'll try to be a bit more honest with that. Why I did it because I felt that we needed in the Democratic Party to have more primaries, to have more challenges to incumbents. The Republicans had started to do this, where you had kind of a lousy establishment candidate, and then it was a Tea Party would run against them and push things around a little bit. So I thought we would need to do this, and Cuomo was such a target because he had drifted very far right. He was like corrupt and vulnerable. He had his name, and what did we have to lose? I had a running mate, Zephyr Teachout. And she's very courageous. So we said, let's go for it. What do we got to lose? Maybe we gain no energy, or maybe we get something. This was before Bernie Sanders, by the way, challenging Clinton. So this was, in some ways, a prototype for that. And so we went for it, and the press liked it. And we had a few moments that really worked, that because we sort of enraged Cuomo, and he made these awkward efforts to squash us, which attracted people to our cause and backfired and got us like name recognition. And there was even once like we just went to this, they had this whole campaign where they were like, we're not going to acknowledge that they even exist. It was attentional warfare. Like, we're not going to acknowledge, people would ask them questions and they would just be like, we don't know who those people are. I don't know what you're talking about, to try to like deny us airtime. So there was this big parade going on. And we thought maybe we'll just go to that parade and try to shake in front of all the press, try to shake hands with the, governor and say, here we are challenging you. So we did that, and it turned into kind of a melee where they were trying to like block his like advisors. We're all trying to like block us from getting into there. And one of them like clubbed me in the head, and then like Zephyr, who's a woman, it's not a good look to be like shoving a woman who's just like, so that got us a lot of publicity.
Sounds very cool.
Yeah. It just made him look like a thug. So yeah, we gained a lot. And near the end, they started calling in the big guns to I started really gaining. I think I was leading, and then they got worried. So then they called in Hillary Clinton and Bill de Blasio to try to like buttress them and damp me down.
You guys down.
And starts anyway. So that's I feel like there was a turning point, but that actually I needed the mayor to Bill de Blasio at the time to endorse me. I think it's it's a problem in the U.S., especially in money and politics, that you have to spend so much time raising money, calling people for money, and that has a warping effect on the personalities of people in U.S. politics.
And an allegiance.
Yes.
You create allegiance. Because, the money co-ops power, and then you're there to express their own interests.
I mean, when one of your rich donors calls, do you like, I can get that later, or do you like, hello?
Yeah,
like that's, you see it, I saw it happening, yeah.
And do you think that part of the problem for the Democrats has been that capture from lobbying power?
I mean, I think absolutely. I mean, I think the reason the Democrats are losing is insincerity, is they say, oh, we're on your side, we're going to do all these things. But then, I mean, just take the topic of my book, tech. I think that most Americans would like better privacy, better protection for their children, maybe like big tech to have less of a cut, like, reduce the amount they're able to take from every transaction. I mean, I probably 80, 70, 80, maybe 90% for when it comes to children. And not only are there no laws, there's not even any votes on any laws. Like, they're totally bottled up. And this was true even when we were in power. Democratic, the Republicans are totally bought out. But the Democrats sort of promised to be different, but they won't hold votes on this stuff. They just will not hold a vote. People, one way or another, someone's gotten to them. And it was very disappointing when I spent, half a year trying to pass basic controls, a little bit like Europe's DMA, Digital Markets Act, basic controls on the tech platforms to balance the economy a little bit more, and basic protections for children, like really basic stuff. And just could not get a vote. Couldn't get it passed, couldn't get a vote on it. And it was always just people calling in. I mean, it's obviously people who've been threatened by the tech platforms, and they call in their secret opposition, and so it never gets there.
But we're seeing that now because we've obviously tried to do this Online Safety Act, there's a Digital Services Act in Europe, and the tech companies, Trump is directly threatening us, right? Like, if you saw the release of this leaked document of their new national security strategy, they're openly talking about overthrowing elected government officials. They're talking about cultivating resistance to current political trends.
God, Europe's got to get its act together, man.
No, we need to pull our finger out.
You guys need your sovereignty, like.
You're like, as you said, one of the biggest markets in the world, and we can't even guarantee our own security.
You guys are playing, Prisoner's Dilemma, where like, you guys are still playing, playing the game while the other side is defected. You're playing the suckers. It's like the other team is not playing by the rules anymore. And, you know, it's like a boxing match, and one side's decide, all right, they're going to start kicking you in the nuts. And you're like, no, we're going to just like play by the old rules.
We've got
and
one hand
like,
tied behind the back.
yeah,
really.
and then we're like, well, we can't. And then you wonder why you can't win when you, anyway, it's a theme I've been surprised by here.
So I wanted to ask as well, you know, we've spoken a bit about the Democrats, but who do you like? Because obviously the conversation is now emerging. There will be primaries. It's going to be, I think, quite a tough race based on the stakes and how high they are. And you worry, don't you, that people are just going to tear lumps out of each other. But is there anyone in particular that's standing out to you at the moment?
First of all, pulling lumps at each other is a good idea. You know, I mean, that's how you figure out.
Is that to
I mean, there's no room for like
weak
people
ideas.
who can't fight anymore.
Yeah, of course.
You know, and there's no room for people who just, you know, you get tired of the third time you hear them talk. I hate to say this, and it's somewhat disloyal, but inside the White House, you know, with Kamala Harris, after a while, I was like, oh my God, I can't go to another one of her speeches because it just was not, you know,
doing anything.
Yeah, it wasn't doing, and that's a mark of like insincerity. You know, kind of know that they're not really, you know, saying that. Yeah. So, I guess this is a little bit of an evasive answer, but I think the process is really important to, you know, to see who's got the fight in them. And who can really do it. I think Pritzker from Illinois is a little underestimated.
I like him.
Yeah.
Some people think he hasn't fully been tested. He kind of, I mean, good and bad about him is he's not like sort of an effete intellectual type. Actually, it's very surprising because he is a billionaire, but he looks like a trade unionist.
He does.
You know,
Yeah,
like he has
big,
he's got a chubbier.
yeah.
He plausibly could be an extra on The Sopranos.
Yeah,
You know, like, but he's got a good handshake. He's, I mean, this stuff is basic. You know, you know, he's got a good handshake. He's got a decent presence. So maybe he's got it.
And he's robust. He pushed back against Trump about deploying the National Guard. And,
he did.
You know,
he's good.
He dealt a few blows.
There's Gavin Newsom, who, you know, I can never really figure out what I think about him. I saw him a few times in the White House. I can't. I don't know. I just want to see how they do. That's what I want to say.
You mentioned about being the prototype before Bernie, and then obviously since we've seen Mandani, do you think there is someone of that cut of people who could actually emerge and be a challenger for the Democrat candidacy?
I can't remember. Was Mandani? He was not born in the United States. I can't remember.
I think it's Uganda.
You're born in Uganda,
Yeah.
or London actually, maybe.
Oh, is it London?
I think he might have been born in London.
He can't do it. I mean, if there is, we're not going to know who they are until they get out there. That was the thing.
Tallarico has been quite impressive recently,
I
thought. And he's from, like, the problem with Gavin Newsom is from California. So how are you going to win these people over it? Because you've got to win over the middle of the country.
But in a certain way, like, you know, you don't yeah, I mean, sometimes these labels, you're from this place, they matter a little bit, but then sometimes it depends really how good a communicator they are.
He's a good communicator.
Yeah.
And his voice is like granite.
Yeah.
Mandani,
Sharp,
you know, he really came out of nowhere.
It's amazing,
he really
isn't it,
came out of
really?
nowhere. And, you know, he just caught people. I think what we have to prevent, what happens is people like that rise. Like Howard Dean was kind of like that in his time.
I don't know who that
before
is.
your time. He's a Vermont governor. Bernie Sanders was like that. What happens, Elizabeth Warren was like that, is they get cut down in the Democratic Party. They get really far and then they get kind of cut down in a way because Biden won. Bernie was about to win. And I think Bernie would have been president, Bernie Sanders. And then everybody united against him to try to like prevent it from happening. Do you remember? I don't know if you watched that. And so somehow the Democratic Party has to avoid that part where they like, you know.
You volunteered for the Bernie
campaign.
campaign.
I worked on the Bernie campaign. And amazingly, it was obviously mostly American, but the sense of appetite that I got from people who, because I always thought that democratic socialist ideas existed on the fringes, especially within America, because there's not a lively culture of this intellectual movement as much as a kind of laborist movement, especially compared to here. But seeing people who are genuinely just mobilized, passionate, excited about what an alternative system could look like is some of they serve as the coattails that I think Trump also went on.
I mean, what happened is that populism was co-opted by Trump. That's what happened. And, and an endless series of errors by the Democratic Party, particularly nominating Hillary Clinton as like the strongest example. Like, how did we think that was going to be like an appealing candidate?
They made a deal. They made a deal, right?
How did we think that? Yeah, I don't know what the reality is.
And then just again turning it back to the UK though, it seems quite difficult for someone like that to emerge within the Labour Party. And we're being outflanked on the left, and a significant chunk of Middle England, who were once our traditional supporter base, are now considering looking at reform as a credible kind of alternative. What is to be done about the Labour Party, which restricts the people like Mandani who could come through, or isolates the people like Bernie Sanders within its own ranks?
Well, one of the challenges, you just won an election, right? So it looks like, well, we won. So what's the problem? That's part
this
of
worked.
Yes, but that's why, as I said before, Labour Party needs to have a reckoning. It doesn't have to be right away, but like 2 years from now or something, decide, is this really, or do we want to have an oppositional candidate who runs against ourselves? And I think parties have to be much more conscious that they're deciding they're going to run against themselves, which is hard because party loyalty and like people like me who worked inside there are never going to be oppositional to ourselves.
Because we thought we'd done a good job.
Yeah, well...
we tried hard.
It's hard. I mean, it's
Do you
loyalty.
think there's also a human thing? Because we know the people who are involved. Why would we want to denigrate?
You don't fuck them over. You don't fuck them over, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Carney basically ran as an oppositional candidate,
yes.
didn't he? And it worked.
Yeah, that's right.
And it kind of feels like that's the only blueprint at the moment. I think what's really interesting is that we're obviously living through a revolutionary moment economically, right? The Thatcherite or Reaganite settlement of the 80s has collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions, and now we're in this time of refiguring out what the economic settlement will be for the next 50 years. And one of the things that I think we're looking for with this podcast is trying to find who will be the John Maynard Keynes
of the course
21st century, who is going to be this kind of erudite economical thinker who can find a way through that still champions what our values are as progressive people, which is, I think, something about a balancing between liberty and communitarian values.
Yeah, I mean, if I could say what my book contributes to that discussion, and I hope in some ways the first half of the book is more about the tech platforms, their rise, their particular brand of economic power, and how it is a threat to future prosperity as they take more. Second half of the book has a lot on what you should want in an economy, frankly. And it is about a balanced economy, and it is about one where you have opportunities for a lot of people to get rich and have a lot more different centers of wealth, both regionally, industrially, and however you name it, as opposed to a few. And it actually does come back to the platforms because it means, or other areas of opportunity. You want platforms or other major things to be hosts for a lot of wealth generation. And, what we need is I think, both in the US, UK, an embrace of a series of candidates who are kind of devoted, I guess, to an anti-monopoly program and a decentralized capitalism, as opposed to, they believe in markets. They don't believe, that government should run everything, because I don't think government runs everything well. They believe government should run some things, but should try to decentralize, spread the wealth, and spread the economic power. That is my key message.
Democratic capitalism, essentially, is what you're arguing for.
That's a good phrase. That's what I should call it.
That, to me, is what it sounds like. And I think there are tenets of that have to be embraced within a, ironically, democratic socialism, which accords itself with greater egalitarianism, kind of social kind of concord, so we're living nicely with each other, and a collective sense of aspiration, irrespective of our material aspirations, but our personal and human aspirations. How can that flourish under an economic model that isn't tear it all down or concentrate it all within either the state or within private monopolies? Is at least what it sounds like to me, what you're advocating for.
Well, this is a good conversation. I mean, I am not personally a socialist. The Democrats, I mean, I get along with the Bernie people very well. And I feel like sometimes what Bernie wants is not any different, much different than what I wanted, in the sense that he is more like about breaking stuff up, like breaking up banks, as opposed to nationalizing the banks at this stage in his thinking. So yes, I'm a big proponent of democratic, decentralized capitalism. And, like I said, a return to a kind of economy that is truly balanced. And that also includes labor, because labor is a counterbalance to employer power. One thing I think we've sort of forgotten, or we think we can have a completely unbalanced system and then somehow pay somebody off later. And I think those systems are doomed to fail.
So going back to what our podcast is all about, which is, I guess, the left thinking introspectively. And I said at the start of this discussion that, and we've spoken about it a bit, that these ideas that we often talk about have been kind of worked out to the nth degree.
Oh, yeah.
But there, to me, seems to be a massive opportunity here.
I disagree with that.
Okay.
I think we are in an age of real profound rethinking. And I'll say that I think we were blinded by the 20th century battle between pure capitalism and pure communism, right? And we're like, so that was an important fight, but it occupied the entire battle. So either you're like a communist or you're like an extreme capitalist. And then when the communists failed, we just said, oh, I guess that's what we take now. But no, that was total craziness. In the sense, there's a lot of within non-communism. There's a lot.
Yeah, of course.
And there's a lot of stuff that was neglected. I'll just take like one local example. The distributists. Do you know who they are? No, not a big movement here in the United Kingdom. There's even this thing called the Distributist League that styled itself as an alternative to capitalism and socialism and believed in the broad distribution of property around a lot of people. And it was like a big political movement in the 1920s, totally forgotten. I just think there's a lot of political movements that got cut off, drowned out by communism, socialism, capitalism.
And I think the distributists have an argument now, especially when you think about the distribution of assets, and the way in which that game has become increasingly impossible for people with fewer of them to accumulate them. And that clearly the only answer to redress that is for the state to be very interventionist on those means. But the thing I wanted to say was that with regards to tech in particular, the left have a real opportunity to reimagine what the project is. Because if you really boil us down to kind of an irreducible core, the left believes in the state. We fundamentally believe that the state intervention can help align, public and private good, common good with private interests. Yeah. Right. So why are we not saying, people love this message about take back control and sovereignty.
Yeah.
We believe in tech regulation to return agency to citizens' life. We will be able to raise money and capital by doing so if we internationally coordinated taxation of these huge MNCs, and that the state should own some of this. They should have skin in the game, to avoid the situation that we currently got, where they're now telling us via their lobbying interests who should be the leader of those parties.
Can I get back to this theme of UK and Europe being a little too wimpy?
Please.
I mean, your essential infrastructures are owned by another country's companies, right? It's as if you've said, all right, build all our toll bridges, like build all our trains or whatever, and then charge whatever the hell you want. Like, who would do that? Yeah. That's crazy.
That's what happened to the trains in this country. They're run by other European companies.
The DLR is run by the Dutch or something.
Well, we're renationalizing now because some of those contracts are expiring. But the privatization fucking experiment has been an absolute unmitigated disaster.
But just think about, like, imagine you let someone build all the toll bridges and say, and just like charge whatever you want. And suddenly, and then also you can discriminate, that's what you did with the tech platforms. And it's kind of weird to me, the degree that's just sort of accepted. I said with like the US, when we found out TikTok was becoming popular, run by China, we're like, we can't have China own our social media network. This is one of the smaller ones. I mean, it's big, but it's not the only one. And the UK and Europe just been like, okay, we'll let these foreign companies, take whatever tax they want on our economy, take like the good, the real, cream of the profit. And I'm kind of surprised that they just sit there and let it happen. It's kind of colonial.
It is.
It's like reverse colonial. It's kind of weird because the UK is used to being the colonial power. But in a weird way, you've gotten into like...
It's the instincts, I think, of a government that seeks to pursue convenience rather than the character of, I would say, the British people. Because there is an instinctively libertarian flow that runs through British people, hence the distributionists. We can do something without the state that serves a greater sense of equality. Hence a significant tradition that has emerged within the Labour Party of libertarian socialism and all of these types of things. But the pursuit of victory of an ideological supremacy in capitalism, the fact that it can be ultra convenient and demonstrably effective for a significant period of time, 20, 30, 40 years or so is now eroding. And that's the problem, is that the convenience of politics aligned to a particular ideology has basically created all of the things that you're just talking about.
Yeah, and economic populism is popular.
Right, that's true.
And we should really think about what the fuck is popular.
Yeah.
But it requires active thinking.
Also, like,
Lever pulling.
I think if you democratized more and you allowed more votes and allowed more space for people to talk about these issues, the thing that would unite a lot of these people is that they're pissed off that they haven't had a real terms pay increase for 50 years.
Well, what you have to do is dethrone the control of neoliberal economists over policy. I mean, that's what, having been inside...
Destroying the OBR is the hill that I want to die on.
I mean, I'll just say, just for an example. So, Kamala Harris did what she could, but didn't run the best campaign. I mean, it's easy to say that. And one of the things, for a while, she said, why don't we, deal with price gouging by grocery stores? And everyone's like, that is absolutely a great idea. And it was very popular and people were in it. But then, there's this, I'm not a conspiracy theory, but there are this kind of cadre of neoliberal economist policy people who put themselves in a position to veto like certain things from our Democratic Party. And they were like, no, we do not have price gouging programs. And so she got rid of it. And it was like she did not run on economic populism, if you hadn't noticed.
Yeah.
And that's because her advisors were like scared off of it by this kind of quiet
corporate lobby interests.
Yeah, it's not only that, no, but it's all that is part of it, but it's also this other like particular group. Larry Summers being one of the major proponents who just call in and say you're going to make a fool of yourself. That's economically disastrous.
Regulated to the
it's going to be terrible, and that's like a factor I think people outside of government don't realize how much influence there is by people like Larry Summers over policy of Democratic. I don't know about Labour Party, Democratic Party.
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty much the same. I mean, we have the same. As long as you have money-run campaigns. Mm-hmm. I mean, I remember you saying once that there was unlimited money on both sides, which I thought was a really interesting way of putting it. But I mean, was it 35 million is the limit in the UK for the last election? You guys are in the billions, so like it's many ordinances greater. But as long as money is in, you open up the capacity for there to be your interest to be, malleable and changed by.
But I'm actually saying something different. I'm pointing the finger at something a little different. You're sort of generally talking about campaign contributions. I agree that is a huge problem. I'm talking about the more particular problem of the policy influence of neoliberal economics and certain figures over particularly Democratic Party, such that if you talk about price gouging, you can't talk about Mandami has broken
rent controls
or rent controls or anything like that people want. Yeah. And Mandami has broken from that and was hugely successful.
And has won.
Yeah, I know. And then,
but in the most liberal city in the country.
True.
Maybe the most liberal city on earth.
That's true.
And I think that's the one caveat that the establishment heads will be thinking, which is that, well, if you couldn't win there, you couldn't win anywhere.
I just also feel like, are people in the center of the country crazy about being price gouged by?
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't know. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think we actually do know. I think people are fighting.
I mean, I think you're right. Economic populism is popular, but I think getting to deliver that message is very hard. You have to fight your party establishment, and not just because of campaign contributions, part of it, but because of the intellectual culture as well.
Yeah, and you do get laughed out of the room when you. I'm not suggesting we don't believe in MMT, but when you suggest that there is an alternative to the current economic consensus on this stuff.
Yeah.
That we should think about international wealth taxes, for instance.
Yeah.
People just go, well, you can't do that.
Right.
Yeah. That's what I'm trying. That's what I think is a big
fight.
That possible. That's the point, isn't it? That politics, the whole game of politics is about figuring out from imagination to then execution how you make stuff possible.
Right.
And having collective buy-in. You'll know that as someone who stood for public office is how do you narrate that story? What are the themes that you're trying to pull? What is the goal, the end goal of your political project? And I just find it desperately sad that, as you say, the mainstream centre-left political movements in both the US, in Europe, in the UK, basically delegitimize and stigmatize what is quite legitimate thinking that seems to affect every person's material circumstance. And for their inability to not comprehend the gravitas of that, I just think is politically stupid. And that's why both centre-left parties, both in the United States and in the UK, are being hollowed out, is because they're not being these institutions of ideas that think about what is possible, that think about the country in the next 50 years. And people are finally saying no to it and want something a bit more, I think, exhaustive in terms of their thinking. People want to know that politicians are thinking about things and the direction of the country, but that imagination now is being rendered to Farage and others.
You're actually making me feel quite optimistic in a way, because in a way it's clear. It just, you have to defeat that leftover generation.
And you got to bring the left on side with us, because I think even some people have listened to this, and I don't know if everyone will get, because it's quite high level conversation. You have to have a lot of background understanding, but there will be people who've listened to this who have heard you say, well, look, I'm not a socialist, I do believe in markets and competition, and will go, he's a neoliberal, and
we have this constricted understanding.
We have this we have a paucity of knowledge.
Here's an understanding, like, for example, the word ordoliberal I think is gone. But I spent a lot of time in the 20s and 30s. There's a huge movement in the 30s of, it's kind of an alternative, frankly, closer to where I am, very anti-monopoly. It's a German movement that was very influential in post-war Germany and building Germany of decentralized economic power. So I feel like we've just lost this conversation about alternatives to laissez-faire capitalism.
I mean, you've got me thinking whether I'm a democratic capitalist more so than a democratic socialist.
I think I am. I think that's what I am, though, because it's kind of I mean, if you look at the expanse of human history, especially the last 100 years, we still have created an enormous amount of wealth. Like, the things that we're complaining about now, if you try to describe that 50 years ago, you would have these supercomputers in your pocket changing your...
We got all that. That's true. But, I mean, there are so many people I know whose work lives are just completely miserable.
Yeah.
They're overworked. Like, they're never allowed to be off their phone. Like, we have completely... They don't get paid well enough for what they're doing, particularly when you think about affordability. I take seriously this generation's concerns, even though, okay, you have a supercomputer in your pocket. How about some time off?
How
about some time? How about a wage that you can afford a house? How about having a house where you can have a family? I mean, that stuff, a supercomputer in your pocket does not compensate for that.
I think the fact that we've got to a place where literally the next generation won't be able to own homes
explain the most essential aspect.
Explain something about how we've responded to the incentives, which is that those who've got skin in the game and who've owned property, we will inflate your assets, we will protect you, we will continue to work for you, and for those of you who are coming down the tracks, tough shit. Like, what a ridiculous... I mean, like, with the people who are looking at all these Gen Z revolutions across the world, what do they think? And one finally happening now in Europe well, right? What do they think this is responsive to? Do they think it's because we're just, lazy and entitled?
Yeah, exactly.
Or is it because actually we're being...
You have a grievance.
Yeah.
You have a grievance because every generation for the last while has been wealthier than their parents.
And we're not
going to could expect that. And, like, it's not happening.
Unless you inherit it.
Right. That's right. There's this narrow band of people who are going to inherit. Although, the parents are pretty good at spending that shit down.
Can you speak from experience?
Is that all your kids' inheritance money gone?
If you're a true meritocrat, you should spend all your money.
I'm talking about people my parents' generation are spending that stuff down. Yeah. I'm not that old, guys.
You've got to make a move. Let me wrap up. Let me wrap up then. Look, Tim, firstly, I think that point you just made at the end here, that there actually is a lot of cause for optimism, is the right one. What we can't do is talk ourselves into a place of, well, this is just the way the status quo and the way things are.
But that's not what we're here to do, I don't think. No. We're here to shine a light to some of these challenges, and it's up to us and people who are listening to take upon that and act accordingly with the information that they've been able to harvest, I guess.
And if we dream big and believe that we can change things, then maybe that will be enough, you know, to bring people on side and to give us trust again. Because really what we're talking about is the defense of democracy right now. Yeah. You know, that's what we're losing. You know? And I think all of us, and I think even wider than just like the Labour movement, or the camp that we want to unite are people who fundamentally believe in a pluralistic society where people are entitled to their own beliefs and want the general population, the common good, to be championed.
Exactly.
Yes. No, I believe it. And I take optimism from two sources. First, that we've faced worse before and overcome it. Like, I really think 100 years ago, in the old days when there were labor problems, they would hire private armies to shoot them. Yeah. Right. Crazy. And like that is a little, and you know, in the end, labor won. I mean, not entirely, but like the middle class got a lot wealthier in this country and a lot of the West. And second, I think this generation, it's maligned a lot, but the generation coming of age is certainly aware that there's something wrong. and are trying to fix it. And I just think it is about a lot of more people running who are more like normal people and finding some of the right candidates and not being deluded by the populist right and its false promises. And I hope when Trump finally crashes and burns, that it'll become obvious what a pile of shit that was.
Yeah.
What a way to leave it on. Tim, thank you very much.
It's been great.
Thank you so much.